Hi, Scope readers. Mackenzie here. I'm a writer here at Scope, and today I'm going to read you my pair text feature, The Amazing History of Shopping in America. Before there was Amazon, there was this, the Sears Catalog. And for millions of American kids, it was a dream come true. By Mackenzie Caro. When Tim was 12, he desperately wanted a bicycle. For weeks, he'd worked odd jobs, babysitting, feeding his neighbor's pig, anything for some extra cash. Now, Tim finally had enough money. But where would he buy his bicycle? He couldn't hop on Amazon. He couldn't ask his parents to take him to Walmart. In fact, there was no place to buy a bicycle for many miles. Was this because Tim lived on a remote island? Or a far-flung outpost in the Arctic? No. Tim lived on a farm in Alabama. But it was 1902. Back then, Amazon didn't exist. There were no Walmarts, and across America, most stores were small, with a limited selection of items. Luckily, Tim had another option, the Sears Catalog. The Sears Catalog was a whole new way to shop. It was thousands of pages long, and it had hundreds of thousands of items for sale. All you had to do was send Sears a letter saying what you wanted and include the cash to pay for it. A few weeks later, your purchase would arrive in the mail. For Tim and millions of other Americans, the Sears Catalog was a dream come true. A time of change. Tim was growing up during a time of enormous change in America. New factories were churning out the latest fashions at breakneck speeds. Incredible new inventions, such as the telephone and the sewing machine, were making life easier and more enjoyable. But not for everyone. Most of this exciting change was happening in cities, and the majority of Americans lived on farms, where life was very different. In the city, you could pop into a department store for whatever you needed, whether it was a pair of socks or a fancy new stove. On a farm, that wasn't an option. You could go to a town, but it was probably at least a day's journey by horse. And once you got there, the only store you'd find would be a general store. These shops tended to be small and expensive. There was virtually no way to buy the kinds of amazing items available in cities. So farm families fended for themselves. They made everything by hand: soap, furniture, curtains. They stitched their own shirts and pants and dresses. They made their own toys from wood and whatever else was around: buttons, scraps of fabric, even rocks. That is, until the Sears Catalog came along. Smashing success. In the 1880s, a railroad worker from Minnesota named Richard W. Sears and his business partner, a watchmaker from Indiana named Alva C. Roebuck, realized that many Americans were hungry for the stuff only city dwellers could get. Sears and Roebuck also knew that the time was perfect for a mail-order business. That is, a business that sells products through the mail rather than at a store. In the late 19th century, America's postal system was becoming faster and more reliable. Railroads were connecting America like never before. It was now possible to deliver goods to parts of the country that were once practically unreachable. In 1888, the first Sears and Roebuck catalog came out. It offered only watches and jewelry. By 1894, it had expanded to include a dizzyingly long list of items. There were baseball bats and gumdrops, guitars, and hats. Each item was listed in the catalog with a price, a short description, and a hand-drawn illustration of what it looked like. The catalog was a smashing success. When it arrived in the mail, families would pore over the pages. Kids would flip to the toy section and gaze longingly at dolls, crayons, and train sets, circling the items they wanted most or cutting them out to decorate their rooms. Women who painstakingly sewed clothes for their families by hand could now buy a sewing machine from Sears and save hours of time. Men could order farm equipment and tools for far less than they would pay at a general store. By 1900, Sears was mailing its catalog to 20 million Americans, and by 1907, the company was raking in $50 million a year. That's about $1.4 billion in today's money. The next big thing. In the 1920s, another innovation changed the way Americans shopped yet again. Henry Ford had invented a new car, the Model T. Unlike previous cars, this one was cheap enough that many Americans could afford to buy it. People once isolated in rural areas could now drive to cities to shop. They no longer needed to rely on only catalogs. Sears knew its business needed to adapt. So in 1925, the company opened a brick-and-mortar store in Chicago. It was called the Sears Roebuck & Co. retail store, and it was built inside the massive warehouse where Sears processed its catalog orders. Customers loved the idea of being able to walk through a giant store filled with all the wonders they saw in the catalog. Within a decade, there were hundreds of Sears department stores across the country. In the coming years, Sears continued to flourish. By 1960, it was the world's largest retailer. But Sears' success would not last forever. With the arrival of sites like Amazon in the mid-1990s, catalogs and department stores got some big competition. In 1993, Sears put out its last catalog. Today, most Sears stores have closed. For Tim and others of his time, it might have been hard to imagine that Sears would ever disappear. Back in 1902, Tim sent Sears his hard-earned $12. 2 weeks later, his brand new bicycle arrived. "Such excitement you never saw in our little town," he wrote to Sears in 1970. "I toured those country lanes every spare minute I had." That was 70 years ago, and I still think Sears is great.